So the next one I've got, and this one also, I'll start with you, Steve, is how do you start to balance things out? Because as you start, when you say internal systems development, I mean, let's say really simple. I developed my very first report, and it's got some information in it, a little bit more complex than what my ERP system could spit out. It's pulling together some pretty cool things. Well, so it doesn't take too long before all of a sudden we hire some new project managers or project engineers, and now we've got to go back and, we've already rolled this thing out and we've got to train them. Oh, and then something changed in the ERP system and the reports broke, or we've got to troubleshoot the data, something changed. And so we've got to go back and basically support this. And that's at the simplest item, like a report. So how do you really, when you're planning your systems development team, how do you factor in training time, improvements made, where somebody comes in and says, oh, hey, this is totally perfect. If you could only, right? If you could only add this one thing, one column, one this, one that, and then really just general support as the world changes. How do you factor that in? Is that like a percentage, or what do you do?
I don't have a hard and fast percentage, but just knowledge-wise, and so when I started, the end of my project was, hey, I deployed it, here it is, and I'd skedaddle, right? Since then, I've learned a whole lot, and really, I think my projects that I've worked on with customers, sometimes even though technology turnover happens every 2 years, those projects may be live in production for 5 years, 10 years. So when you look at like the longer time scales, you really have to think, okay, start from that goal in mind and think like, okay, if our product is in production for 10 years, let's kind of work backwards. What is that going to look like? And sometimes that is hand in hand with your organization, right? Sometimes that is, well, in 10 years, how big are we going to get? How big do we want to grow? What does that look like? And you can kind of start to back into, wow, this is going to grow from, a select group of 8 project managers to 100 project managers, or whatever the count is. And you can start to think through that, because truly, and some of that is just maturity of your systems development group. I guarantee you will misplan that support and training number many times before you get it right. One of the other real challenging parts for me was, working on within different teams that may or may not have the great technology skills to begin with. So factoring in training actually meant teaching them how to use the technology, not our tooling, but how to point and click sometimes with a laptop, or how to use their mobile technology, or maybe our application integrated with a new tool to them, right? Not everybody is an Excel wizard, and we may build something that is Excel-based. So I wish I had a good percentage, but I found like truly it is, just like we talked about, the building things aspect is 50%. I would say the support and training, it may not be 50% because there's a lot of design time involved, but it's well over 25 or 30% of the entire budget. Support lasts forever, and we talked about scope creep. That's not always the worst thing, right? The requirements change. So making those changes, I would kind of significantly budget on that one, but I don't have a perfect figure for you, unfortunately.
The one thing that I remember. Oh, sorry, Chris.
No, go ahead, David.
Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, Steve, the one number that always stuck in my head that I thought was complete bullhucky the first time you told me, one of Steve's best friends is a developer at Microsoft, actually runs a large development team, or used to run a large development team there. And I think you'd come back and told me that they only budget half the day. So basically they look at a software developer and they only budget 4 hours per day for that person to be hands-on keyboard programming. So, if the manager, say, like if Chris went through and said it's a 200-hour project, they're basically looking at developers, and they're really only planning those developers work 20 hours a week. So my first thing, so being a contractor, being very in tune with field productivity, we build field productivity apps, we focus on a lot. I'm like, oh, that's BS, Steve. There's no way. An average pipe fitter, man, he's productive about 95% of the day. Time on tools, which that's actually not quite true, but if you ask them, it's totally true. Anyways, totally didn't see that, but actually when you start to go to scale and you play that out, that's kind of how it is, because there's a lot of time that goes into planning meetings, just coordination of syncing up, help desk and support. You've also got to relearn a lot of things. You see it even, in most trades, there's new codes and new materials that come in. But in the technology world, like I said, the half-life is about every 2 years. So the amount of training time they have to stay current is very, very different. So a big mistake people make is starting with that one person who's doing some report writing and a little bit of programming, and their production rate seems like it's just awesome for the first 6 months. But then as they get a lot of things into production, then these things like support and training and minor adds, moves, changes start to come into play, and it seems like the production goes down. So it's funny how often that shows up kind of in their annual reviews and things like that, and it's really not true. It's not that their production went down. Really, at the same time, they're actually more stressed than ever and working harder than ever, doing a lot of things they don't truly enjoy and failing at it. So you've got to factor that in as a manager. And Chris, you do awesome at this, so how do you do it?
Well, one of the things that I've seen in a lot of successful organizations in terms of the support and the training is, again, that close cohesion between, software development, the IT function, and the business group, and the deployment of subject matter experts. So the people that are within the functional groups that had a high amount of involvement in communicating what the need was and helping with the iterative software development piece, seeing what was delivered, they now really understand the application that's been developed, how it works, and they can participate in the training. They can take a lot of the front-end questions from their groups coming back in rather than it just going into a generic help desk environment. And not only does it help with the training, it helps with support for things that can be deployed from the applications developer for things that need to be fixed, where they develop a tool where it's a reset tool, and it doesn't have to be done by a software developer. It doesn't have to be done by the help desk. It can be done by a power user in the end user group. And they also are gathering information for systems development for the things that they would need to plan for. So it can actually help them plan for hours that are going to be required to develop the new functionality or the things that need to be critically fixed that a power user can't do. So again, it's that communication. I think we've talked about it in a number of questions here. It's really that increasing that flow of communication within the business that's going to make your systems development team that much more effective.
That's a great point, Chris. That really gets into integrating everybody else in the company so that there is truly some joint ownership of the tool. So that's awesome. That's great insight.